MultiGreen, building attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily real estate through impact investing.
Welcome to the MultiGreen podcast. I'm your host, Randy Norton, and today we'll be speaking with retired neurosurgeon and former Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson. After completing his tenure at HUD in 2021, Dr. Carson founded the American Cornerstone Institute, which works with conservative, nonpartisan, and faith-based organizations in D.C. and across the country to address our nation's toughest challenges. And attainable housing is one of them. Enjoy our conversation. Dr. Ben Carson, thank you so much for being on the MultiGreen podcast today.
Well, it is an honor and a pleasure, and I very much appreciate what MultiGreen stands for. Affordable housing that's environmentally friendly. I love it.
Well, you were part of that inspiration, and thank you for being the 17th HUD Secretary of the United States of America.
Well, thank you. I never intended to be in government, but somehow it all worked out that way.
Absolutely. Well, we've been cheering you from afar, as you know, and in our family, your name and grace, you really walk on water. On August 7th, 2008, my nephew was born with hydrocephalus. And at the time, my brother-in-law was living in the Washington, D.C. area as he was serving at the Walter Reed Hospital. And I just wanted to note that you and Dr. Edward Ahn and Dr. Ben Jallo performed Carson's surgeries. And in fact, my nephew's name is Carson Keller because of your inspiration. And Dr. Carson, you were the senior partner at this Johns Hopkins neurosurgery group who consulted and checked on my nephew a couple of times. And it was your turn, Dr. Carson, at the hospital doing rounds. And to this day, my family is so grateful for your gifted hands. So thank you.
Absolutely. There's no greater privilege than being able to intervene in people's lives and make them better. So thank you for that story. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And it's also come to my attention that you have co-authored or authored 12 books, 5 of which were with your wife. And one of my favorite movies of all time is the Ben Carson story. It brought myself to tears. I've watched it numerous times. There's other books that, of course, have been written. And your most recent, Why America Matters. And in 2001, you were named by CNN and Time Magazine as one of the nation's 20 foremost physicians and scientists alive today, as a living legend at the Library of Congress.
That was before they discovered I was conservative.
Touché. In 2008, Dr. Carson, of course, you received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, no higher civic honor in the United States. And of course, in 2010, you were elected into the National Academy of Medicine. Tremendous, tremendous work you've done in the Washington, D.C. area.
I've had a very blessed life, and I've been privileged to associate with many spectacular people who sometimes are in the background and don't get the credit, but I couldn't have done any of it without all of those people, including my wife.
Your wife is an inspiration. Your mother was fantastic. I've read everything about you, Dr. Carson, and thank you for all the service you've provided. Today, we're going to talk about your stint as the 17th Secretary of HUD, and your work really continues to influence us here at MultiGreen. Before COVID, there was a housing crisis. Post-COVID, there continues to be a housing crisis. And here at MultiGreen, we are committed to build 40,000 attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled homes by 2030. And we're well on our way to do that. And while you were at HUD, one of your greatest accomplishments, well, there was many, but we have been a benefactor of your Opportunity Zone initiative. And with your assistance and the backing of the U.S. government behind your work, we are also aligned with this. So, Dr. Carson, thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. And it was a great privilege to be able to get involved with the Opportunity Zone. That was one of the greatest accomplishments, being able to lead that effort for the government. And it was predicted that it would bring in $100 billion in 10 years. In the first 2 years, it brought in $75 billion, 3/4 of that before COVID hit. And being able to create programs where you had cooperation between federal, state, and local governments, along with nonprofits, faith-based organizations, other private industries, made things work so much better. And as things began to build, they attracted other business that weren't necessarily involved in the program, but wanted to capitalize on the growth that was going on in the area. So those are the kinds of things that I think government should be doing, working with the private sector in order to encourage the tremendous innovation and entrepreneurship that has always characterized our nation.
I totally agree. One of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's missions is to increase homeownership and support community development, and while so, increase access to affordable housing, free from discrimination. During your tenure as Secretary of HUD, what are you most proud of accomplishing?
Boy, there are so many things. First of all, when we started, it was kind of difficult because I didn't have any assistant secretaries for the first 5 months and no deputy secretary for the first 8 months. They just dragged their feet. You didn't notice that with this change of administrations. But at any rate, it was a terrible situation because of the fiscal mismanagement that was going on in the agency. And they had not had an audit for 8 years. It is a federal requirement that every agency have an audit every year. You couldn't do an audit at HUD because there were so many material defects. So the first thing we had to do was bring in some real talent. We got one of the senior partners from Ernst & Young. After much arm twisting, he actually came and put together a team, and they revamped HUD such that we really were able to actually finally be able to do an audit, to be able to straighten out the tremendous messes. You used to always hear these stories about fiscal mismanagement at HUD. I hope people have noticed you don't hear those anymore. And I hope they don't crop up again after all the work that went into fixing it. But once you get that fixed, it makes it much easier to do the other programs. So, it made it easier to push the program that we were just talking about with the opportunity zones. We were able to rectify a situation that was brought to our attention in only 4 months. A bunch of young people came to us and they said that 20,000 young people age out of foster care every year. And at least a quarter of them end up homeless, and many in worse situations than that. You can imagine the kinds of things that they'd get into, having no support and no place to live. So our team was so inspired. Within 4 months, we had created the FYI program, Foster Youth to Independence, providing not only a place to stay, but the wraparound services. Because you can imagine, even if you were 18 years old and had a place to stay, but you didn't have any support, what would happen to you? Most 18-year-olds have no clue what to do. So that was a very, very successful program. And we were very happy to be able to create the Envision Centers, where we would take federal aid along with state aid, along with local aid, and the faith-based organizations, put all of this stuff under one roof so that that mother of 3 who never finished high school can come to one place, get childcare, find out how to get her GED, get advanced training so that she can become independent, and teach that to her children, because that's the only way you break those cycles of dependency that have plagued our nation for such a long time. And then with an executive order, President Trump created the White House Council on Removing Barriers to Affordable Housing. I was privileged to lead that multi-agency task force. And we did a bus tour across the country, stopping in lots of locations and, identifying problems and bringing all the various important agencies together at a federal, state, and local level to address the problems that existed and to get dialogue going. Because, affordable housing is not a partisan issue. Everybody needs housing. And this is an area where I think we can just, put away the swords and start finding ways that we can work together for the advancement of our entire society.
Being in the private sector where I am sitting, what can we do to be more involved with HUD and these initiatives?
Well, I think continuing the dialogue is so important. There's a tendency for people to get into their respective corners and hurl hand grenades at each other, as opposed to actually sitting down and agreeing on what is necessary. I mean, what do we need in order to take care of all of those people out there who are homeless, for instance? Well, first we have to understand that a large number of those people are mentally ill. A large number of those people are drug addicts. By just taking an approach that says, housing first, let's just get them off the street and forget about them, that doesn't work. I think it has to be housing first, housing second, which is diagnosing the reason that they're on the street in the first place, and housing third, fixing that problem so that you just don't have a continuation of what's going on. And the more people we have who realize that and work toward that end, obviously the better off we're going to be. It means working with your local politicians, helping them to understand what the real issues are, and that you're willing to work with them in order to actually solve these problems.
Dr. Carson, from spending periods of time growing up in multifamily dwellings, both in Detroit and Boston and other areas, you understand how attainable housing and the importance of infrastructure and economically stable neighborhoods can be. How can we as a nation solve the housing crisis?
Well, first we have to want to solve it. One of the things that really astonished me when I came into HUD, I thought this was going to be a slam dunk. Everybody's going to want to get these people into housing, into affordable housing, get people to be self-sufficient, not dependent on the government. Boy, was I in for a surprise. There are a lot of people in government on Capitol Hill. I guess that's the reason it's called a swamp, although I call it a cesspool, who really don't want people out of poverty. They don't want people out of dependency. And this is something that we've got to change. And the only way we're going to change that is we have to know who we are electing as our representatives. Are they people who are truly interested in the well-being of the people in the community? Or are they people who want to push an agenda, who are ideologues, who want power? And that's the reason that the founders gave us the kind of system that we have now, so that we, the people, could identify what the problems were and rectify them without a revolution, without a war every time we turned around. But we have to be cognizant of our role, and we each have a sphere of influence, and we have to be willing to exercise it, and not just have our finger up in the air seeing which way the wind is blowing and then moving in that direction. That's the only way that we're going to be able to solve these kinds of problems.
Dr. Carson, in 2021, you founded the American Cornerstone Institute, which is centered around advancing policies that promote the following 4 cornerstones: faith, liberty, community, and life. How do you feel housing fits into strengthening the community cornerstone?
Well, housing is critical. Everybody needs housing, even animals. Animals are always looking for a place where they can feel safe and secure. And that's what housing provides for people. And until you have that sense of security, how can you turn around and concentrate on anything else? And, there's so many issues that we need to deal with, sociological issues, but it's never going to happen unless people feel that they have a sense of safety and security in their homes. And it all ties together. It even ties together with our faith, because Alexis de Tocqueville in 1831, when he came to America to study our nation, because the Europeans were so fascinated with how a nation barely 50 years old was already competing with them on virtually every level, they said, this is impossible. And he was going to figure out what was going on. but he was duly impressed with our government model, checks and balances, duly impressed with our business model that encouraged entrepreneurship and innovation, very impressed with our educational system. And if you really want to be impressed, go back and look at an exit exam for the sixth grade to get a sixth grade certificate in the mid 1800s. You'll be very impressed by what people had to know. And it made a big difference. But the thing that impressed them most of all were the fiery sermons that came out of the church and the moral basis that the people had and the way that it encouraged a ragtag bunch of militiamen to be able to defeat the most powerful military force on earth. So it all ties in with learning how to love your neighbor versus cancel your neighbor if they don't agree with you, and learning how to use our different skills and talents to work together to provide a nourishing community that helps people to be able to flourish. And our respect for life from the womb to the tomb. As we've moved away from respecting life, we've moved away from respecting each other. And our relationships have become much more coarse, and there's a lot of divisiveness. All of that is completely unnecessary. And we need to stop and once again look at those values and those principles that are espoused in our Constitution and in our Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I will point out that we also have a pediatric component to American Cornerstone. It's called a Little Patriots program. It's a free online teaching program to teach the children what our true history is, what our true values are. Warts and all, we don't skip out on anything, but we put it in perspective. And you'll find that the good far outweighs the bad. And I think it is the wrong thing to just concentrate on slavery and other things that have happened, which, by the way, are not unique to the United States by any stretch of the imagination. The only thing that's unique about us is that we had so many people who were vehemently opposed to slavery that we fought a bloody civil war and lost a large portion of our population to get rid of it. We need to give people our true history, because your history gives you your identity, and your identity is the basis of your beliefs.
I love that. All those values and principles resonate with me, and I am a firm believer in the Constitution and all of the Founding Fathers' principles. I love studying all of them, and when I go to Washington, D.C., I hold that in reverence, and I love Mount Vernon and everything else that's in Washington, D.C. Thank you for reminding me of those wonderful virtues and the foundation of our country. We're based on all those principles.
But we have a tremendous country, and we have to decide: do we want to build our future on our past failures or on our tremendous successes? And I think if we choose the latter, our best days are ahead of us.
Our future is only as bright as our faith, as one man said. Your Cornerstone Conversation series that I watched in preparation for this interview today, which are wonderful. You had one specific interview with Senator Todd Young from Indiana, and it was a great segment on housing. You mentioned that we need to take this out of the political sphere and take it across administrations, and that despite regulatory barriers, there is room for optimism. And I agree. What is needed from the public and private sector to increase attainable housing going forward?
Well, the problem is that, we switch administrations. And, we go to the left, and then we swing to the right, and then we back to the left and back to the right. So we never make any forward progress. And what is really necessary is that our representatives have got to be able to sit down and plot out a course that they can both agree on, so that we're not back and forth all the time, and we have a North Star that will guide us. And then I think we can make some real progress. And, it needs to be done in a public way. Everybody can see it. Everybody can see who's on board. And I think that will solve a lot of the problems with subsequent elections when it comes to the housing issue. And I'll tell you, it is possible to work together. I mean, we were very close to an agreement on how to solve the homelessness problem in Los Angeles, working with Mayor Garcetti, Governor Newsom, the county executives. And then COVID hit, and boom, the whole thing was off the table. But it is possible to work together. We just have to be willing to sit down and do it.
Is there anything MultiGreen or the private sector can do to specifically support your work at ACI?
Well, I think the best thing that you can do, obviously, is to make people aware of ACI. It's growing very, very rapidly. It's not just a think tank, it's a do tank. We actually do stuff. So that's why we have the Little Patriots program, which is free of charge, by the way, because we get people to underwrite the program. We've started an Executive 101 series, which has interviews from people in very important government positions, people who've headed up government programs, because we want people out there to actually understand how the government works. I don't want it to be a mysterious thing for people. And we want people to learn from our experiences, because many of us at HUD came into government without a lot of government experience. And, you know, we were able to blaze a path, and we don't want everybody else to have to blaze a path when you can just take the path that's there and then take it even further. That's what we need to be thinking about. The more you can get that message out, the better. And then just continuing your work with local governmental officials and just gently prodding them to forget about partisanship and to concentrate on the people. The more individuals and organizations we have helping our government officials to recognize that we're not each other's enemies and that we have to work together to solve these problems, the better off we're going to be.
What would your advice be for MultiGreen as we move forward with our mission?
Keep your eye on the prize. Don't get distracted. For instance, there's some people in the green movement who say everything has to be the environment as we see it. And they don't see any room for compromise. And what we need to do is, you know, just for instance, on the energy issue, green renewable energy is something that I think is highly desirable, but we're not ready to transition completely to it yet. We do have fossil fuels. We've discovered clean ways to extract and to use them. We had the cleanest air and water ever during the last administration. Became independent in terms of energy and net exporter. Those are good things. We can use those while we're working on the green renewable energy, and we can substitute the green renewable energy as it becomes feasible bit by bit, rather than trying to do a big change suddenly that wreaks havoc on the economy and on the lives of a lot of people. We just have to learn how to compromise and to move in a gradual way toward our goals.
Here at MultiGreen, it will be a transition. It's not going to be all at once. The technology is not there today. And we aspire and we commit to net zero initiatives, but it's definitely a balance, and it is people first.
And that's wisdom speaking, and I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, we know that there is some ESG initiatives out there that are very cost prohibitive and potentially dangerous, and we're trying to be a little more balanced about it. We ask all of our guests what the word attainability means to them, and we'd like to ask you, what does the word attainability mean to you?
To me, it means something that we can reach, something that we can do. And the key word there is we. If we're willing to work together, you look at what this country has been able to accomplish. You think about World War II, when the Nazism was about to take over the world, and we sent our women into the factories to build more airplanes, tanks, and mortars than anybody could imagine. Our young men from the cities, the suburbs, from every part of our nation, 16, 17, 18 years old, many of them lied about their age so they could fight for our country. And we were able to attain victory. we can do almost anything if we're willing to work together. That's what attainable means to me.
Thank you for that definition. I view this as a war on housing. And just like there's a war on climate, I know that the military academies are teaching about principles, on the war on climate. This really is a battle, isn't it, when it comes to housing?
There's no question it's a battle, but do recognize that we are incredibly innovative people. And if we can just get people to be reasonable when it comes to regulations. I looked at some of the innovative housing concepts. They were absolutely spectacular. But by the time you get through with all the regulatory requirements, you take something that was eminently affordable, it's no longer affordable. So we have to use our intellect to figure out how do we keep people and the environment safe, but at the same time, not put up regulatory barriers that preclude progress.
Dr. Carson, thank you so much for being with us today on the MultiGreen podcast.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for what you're doing for the people of our nation.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Join us as we build 40,000 attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily homes by 2030. And if you like the content you're hearing, hit the subscribe button. Follow us at Think MultiGreen and sign up to learn more at www.multi.green.